Syrian crisis is the most pressing humanitarian challenge facing us at this time, and the government is to be commended on co-hosting this important conference, which has raised over $10 billion for Syrian refugees. And the government is also to be commended on doubling our own commitment to over £2.3 billion. The emphasis on education and jobs is entirely correct. We cannot allow a whole generation of Syrian children to be lost. However, the Secretary of State will be aware of the report by Concern Worldwide, which reveals that a third of the funds pledged to Syria during 2015 had not been confirmed by December of that year. So is she able to say whether all the money pledged in 2015 has been confirmed now? And does she appreciate the entire House hopes that she will get other countries not just to match our generosity, but actually to hand the money over? But the wholly commendable efforts for Syrian refugees in the region belie the government's willful myopia to the plight of over 500,000 Syrian refugees who are here in Europe. It is true that the majority of Syrian refugees are in the region, and the situation continues to worsen. We'll all have seen the television pictures of the weekend of tens of thousands of terrified Syrians waiting at the border with Turkey in response to Assad's bombardment of Aleppo. But can the Secretary of State explain how much longer this country and the EU can expect Turkey to keep its border with Syria open, whilst at one and the same time we want to prevent refugees from transiting towards Western Europe? The funds this conference will raise are vital, but surely it's also vital that this country shows a willingness to take its fair share of refugees, including Syrian refugees. Currently, the UK has agreed to take over 5 years fewer refugees than Germany has taken in a month. We appreciate on this side that this country is not signed up to Schengen. But does the Secretary of State acknowledge that the fact that we are not signatories to Schengen does not remove the moral responsibility that falls on us as part of the European family of nations? And does the Secretary of State accept that very many people are surprised and disappointed that the government has rejected the Save the Children campaign to take in just 3,000 child refugees? The Secretary of State may well wish these children had stayed in the region, but the direction in which the children chose to flee does not make them any less vulnerable. These children may not be in the part of the world the Secretary of State would prefer, but they are still lone children at risk of abuse, sex trafficking and worse. The Secretary of State cannot behave as if there are two classes of child Syrian refugees. One set who stay in the region, who she is prepared to help, but then another class who have travelled to Europe, on whom she turns her back. The Secretary of State will also have heard reports of the German Chancellor's speech in Turkey today. Does she agree with Angela Merkel that the ultimate solution to the current migrant crisis is safe and legal pathways for refugees? On the political process, I'm glad to say that on this side, we very much support the call on all sides in the Syrian civil war to take steps to move forward to sustainable peace negotiation. In particular, Russia must use its influence on the Assad regime. And we entirely agree that it's unacceptable and illegal to use siege, starvation, and the blockage of humanitarian aid as a weapon of war. And we welcome the steps being taken to freeze Daesh assets and other restrictive measures which my honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, has been calling on for some time. In conclusion, let me say this. Of course, most Syrians, all Syrian refugees, want to return home. Immigrants and refugees, whether they go home or not, never lose that hope in their hearts that they will return to the country they were born in. But the fact is, Whether the Secretary of State would prefer it or not, there are 500,000 Syrian refugees here in Western Europe. Together with my honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, I visited the camp in Calais and met very many Syrian refugees there, many of whom, it seemed to us, actually had a legal right to come to this country, but all of whom were living in appalling conditions. When the caravan of these international events have moved on, there are still going to be thousands of Syrians and other refugees, including an increasing proportion of women and children, living in appalling conditions in Europe, frightened, terrorised, and at the mercy of people traffickers. We may all wish that they had not listened to the people traffickers, but this government should be doing more, not just for Syrian refugees in the region, but for the very many Syrian refugees here in Western Europe.